Bestie, Obina sent you money this morning, then Kelechi came with groceries this afternoon. Same week, no cap. Same week, same house, different days, my dear. You're actually crazy. I'm so proud of you. It's embarrassing. Babe, we didn't relocate to this Lagos to be suffering and smiling for one man. Say it louder. But 3 men and nobody has caught you. How are you this unbothered? Babes, everybody has their own day. Nobody crosses into another person's shift. Bestie, this isn't dating anymore. This is operations management. Yes, so Obina owns Saturdays. Kelechi is my Wednesday guy. Chibuzo is random, but before he even reaches my street, I already know he's coming. You even have security updates. Girl, you're running this thing like a CEO. 3 investors, 1 CEO. Guess who the CEO is? The way I could never. We really said soft life or nothing. These men have the money. I have the brains. It's giving balance of power. 2 years and not one slip. You're literally a different species. Not one. They trust me like a fixed deposit. No withdrawals, only deposits. I'm telling you, nothing can touch you. Nothing can touch me.
She really believed that. And honestly, if you had seen her life from the outside, you might have believed it too. But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button because the way this story ends, you are going to want to have been here from the beginning. On the mainland, Surulere side, on a quiet street off Bode Thomas, there lived a girl everyone simply called Fine Girl. Her real name was Neoma Okafor, but on that street, nobody cared much about her real name. The moment she walked past, it was her shape and her swagger people noticed first. Skin smooth like she just walked out of a spa, hair always laid, nails always fresh, and a smile that could make any man forget his problems for a few seconds. Neoma didn't have a regular job. If you asked what she did for a living, she'd laugh and say, "I did do small business, my dear. Hustle is hustle." Nobody pushed too hard because in Lagos, everybody's hustling one way or another, and as long as money kept showing up, people didn't ask too many questions. But the truth was, Neoma had one very specific business, and that business was men. Not just one man, 3 different men, 3 different stories, 3 completely separate lives that she balanced like a professional juggler in a circus where the slightest mistake meant everything crashing to the ground. The first man was Obina, a big man, timber business down in Apapa, money flowing steadily from contracts and warehouse deals. Obina was in his early 40s, serious, hardworking, the type who didn't waste time on small talk. He had built his wealth brick by brick, and now he wanted a wife. Calm, simple, the kind of woman his mother back in the village would approve before she stopped giving him peace about grandchildren. Obina visited every Saturday like clockwork, always with bags of provisions and an envelope. He believed Neoma was a quiet, humble graduate, patiently waiting for him to settle things so they could marry. He had no idea about the other 2. The second man was Kelechi, a civil servant, mid-level officer in a ministry, the kind of man who counted his money carefully because there wasn't much of it, but who gave with his whole heart anyway. Kelechi wasn't rich, not even close, but he was soft, attentive, the type who remembered small details. He visited Wednesdays and sometimes Friday evenings after work, bringing whatever he could afford. He believed with his entire heart that Neoma loved him for who he was, because she always told him exactly that, softly, convincingly, like she meant every word. And then there was Chibuzo, the dangerous one. Son of a feared, respected chief in the area, a young man who had never once been told no by anyone who valued their safety. Chibuzo didn't come on a schedule. He came whenever he wanted, depending on his mood, his travels, his business. He believed Neoma was completely loyal to him alone, and he was already telling his father he intended to bring her into the family as his wife. Generous, yes, but also possessive, quick-tempered, and not a man anyone wanted to cross. 3 men, 3 different rhythms, 3 different versions of Neoma. The humble wife in waiting for Obina, the soft, loving girlfriend for Kelechi, the loyal future queen for Chibuzo. And somehow, for almost 2 years, she had kept all 3 of them completely unaware of each other's existence. How did she do it? She wasn't lucky, she was strategic. Every visit was scheduled with the precision of an airport timetable. Obina's Saturdays were sacred. Kelechi's Wednesdays and occasional Fridays were locked in early evening since he liked to be home by 8. Chibuzo was the wild card, and so Ineoma had built an early warning system just for him, her cousin Ifeoma, and a neighbor's teenage daughter named Blessing, who ran errands around the street. Blessing didn't know exactly what was going on, but she knew that any time a black Toyota Camry turned onto the street, she was to run, not walk, to Ineoma's gate and knock twice fast. She got paid weekly for that, no questions asked. Ifeoma, 19, fresh out of secondary school, lived with Ineoma supposedly to learn business while saving for university. She knew fragments of the truth. She knew about Obina, the big man with money. She knew Ineoma sometimes complained about Kelechi being too poor but too sweet to drop, but she didn't know about Chibuzo. Nobody outside Ineoma's closest circle knew about Chibuzo because even Ineoma understood that some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with family. Here's where the story gets interesting, because secrets in this city don't stay secret. They wait, they simmer, they connect underground in ways nobody sees coming, until one day they erupt all at once in the most public, most humiliating way possible. And that day was coming faster than Ineoma realized. It started small. Kelechi had left his analog watch on Ineoma's dresser one Wednesday evening, the brown leather strap one his father had given him. He's called the next day, frantic, asking if she'd seen it, and Ineoma calmly told him not to worry, she'd keep it safe until his next visit. Obina noticed it first. That Saturday, while Ineoma was in the bathroom, his eyes landed on the watch. He picked it up, studied the worn leather strap. Clearly not his, he wore an expensive gold face chronograph. This was old, modest, sentimental looking. A man's watch. When Ineoma came out and saw him holding it, her heart dropped, but you'd never have known it from her face. "Oh, that's my brother's. He left it here when he came to greet me. I keep telling him to come and collect it before he loses it again." Obina simply nodded and let it go. Crisis averted. But inside, something had shifted. Ineoma made a mental note, tighten the system. Because secrets don't just hide in dressers, they hide in mouths, in market gossip, in the overlapping circles of a city where everybody somehow knows somebody who knows somebody else. Surulere isn't that big. The market women who sold Ineoma her foodstuff also supplied food nearby, including, unknown to her, the household of Chibuzo's personal driver, a quiet, observant man named Tunde, who had driven Chibuzo around for 6 years and knew this town better than anyone. Tunde had seen Ineoma before, not just with Chibuzo, but once, months earlier, getting out of a different car altogether. An older, dark blue Mercedes, driven by a heavy-set man in his 40s. He hadn't thought much of it then, but drivers talk to kill time. And one slow afternoon, waiting outside a meeting, Tunde struck up a conversation with another driver, one who drove for a timber merchant. The man mentioned his boss's wife-to-be, a beautiful, humble girl on Bode Thomas. Tunde froze for half a second. The description matched, too close. He didn't say anything yet, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and once planted, that kind of seed doesn't disappear. It waits quietly, waiting for more information to water it. Let's pause on Kelechi for a moment, because his side of this matters as much as anyone else's. Raised by a single mother in Ajegunle who worked 3 cleaning jobs to put him through school, he'd studied hard, gotten into the civil service through sheer determination, and now, in his early 30s, finally felt life was rewarding his patience. He wasn't rich, not even close, but he was steady, kind, the kind of man who still called his mother every night, who genuinely believed love mattered more than money. When he met Ineoma at a friend's birthday party a year and a half ago, he'd been completely captivated, not just by her beauty, but how she listened to him. Really listened. Nobody had ever made him feel so seen. Ineoma, professional that she was, knew exactly what she was doing. Some men don't need flashy promises, they just need to feel important. She gave Kelechi that feeling in abundance, while quietly draining nearly 40% of his monthly salary, month after month, in support payments he gave freely, believing everyone was an investment in their future. He had even started saving secretly for an engagement ring. Hold that thought. Now, Chibuzo, a most volatile piece of this puzzle, 28, handsome in a hard, sharp-edged way, the kind of confidence that comes from never facing real consequences. His father, Chief Adola Ezeigwe, was a powerful man whose name alone could open or close doors depending on his mood. Chibuzo had absorbed that energy completely. When he wanted something, he expected to get it. When he loved something, he expected total, uncontested ownership of it.
He'd met Neoma at a lounge in Lekki a year earlier and sent a bottle to her table before even asking her name. Neoma had been more careful with him than with the others because she understood, the way a smart predator understands a more dangerous one, that Chibuzo wasn't a man to be played carelessly. The one time she'd pushed back gently about his unpredictable schedule, his eyes had gone cold and flat in a way that made her stomach turn, and he'd said quietly, "Don't ever raise your voice at me again." She never had. This matters because Neoma wasn't simply a heartless manipulator enjoying easy money. She was also, in her own way, trapped by the lies she now had to maintain to survive, and increasingly by a man whose temper she genuinely feared. The soft life she was funding had become its own kind of prison, and the walls were closing in from multiple directions at once. Now let's bring the suspense back up, because things were about to get a lot more complicated, fast. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. Neoma had just seen Kelechi off. He'd come briefly, dropped some money for data and upkeep, and left around 7. She was in the kitchen, still in her house wrapper, completely unprepared for visitors, when she heard a car pull up. She assumed it was Blessing on another errand. She wasn't expecting anyone. Obina's day was Saturday, Kelechi had just left, and Chibuzon always messaged before showing up. Except this time, he hadn't. She heard his voice at the gate before she even processed what was happening, and her body went cold. She rushed to fix herself, plastered on the soft, adoring smile she wore specifically for him, and opened the door. "Baby, you didn't tell me you were coming," she said, voice light, betraying nothing. "I was in the area," he said, walking past her into the living room without waiting for an invitation. "Thought I would surprise you." His eyes drifted lazily across the side table near the entrance and landed on a half-empty pack of Dunhill blue cigarettes. Kelechi's brand, forgotten in his rush to leave before curfew. Chibuzo didn't smoke. Neither did Neoma. He picked up the pack slowly, turning it in his fingers. "Uzomi this." Under different circumstances, with a different man, panic might have shown, but Neoma had learned that hesitation was deadly with Chibuzon. You couldn't pause, couldn't let your eyes flicker wrong. You had to answer instantly, like the lie had been sitting ready in your mouth the whole time. "Oh, that's Ifeoma's friend's own, the boy that's always coming to disturb her. I keep telling her to stop bringing those small boys into my house." Chibuzon studied the pack a moment longer, then tossed it back on the table, satisfied. "Tell Ifeoma to control her friends," he said, already moving on. Neoma exhaled internally, but the relief was thin. Surviving one close call doesn't mean the danger is gone, it just means it's still circling. That night, alone in her room, staring at the ceiling fan, she felt something unfamiliar creeping into her chest. Not guilt, which she'd buried years ago, but a quiet, persistent fear that the architecture she had built was becoming harder to maintain. The margin for error was shrinking. But here's the thing about people who build their lives on deception. Even when fear whispers warnings, greed usually shouts louder. Instead of slowing down, she doubled down, color-coding which items belong to which man, training Ifeoma more thoroughly on what to say, paying Blessing more to extend her watch duty. For almost 2 more months, it worked. Obina kept coming Saturdays, increasingly talking about wedding plans. Kelechi kept coming Wednesdays, his ring fund nearly complete. Chibuzo kept coming whenever he pleased, increasingly mentioning to his father that he intended to formally introduce Neoma soon, an idea that filled her with dread because meeting Chief Ezeigwe meant exposure she could not survive. Now here's the first real turn, the kind of twist that changes how you see everything before it. Remember Tunde,
The seed of suspicion had quietly been growing, watered by small coincidences. He'd start noticing the exact gate Chibuzon walked towards. One Saturday, dropping something off at a different time than usual, he noticed a different car parked outside that same gate. The same dark blue Mercedes the timber merchant's driver had described. Tunde wasn't a gossip by nature, but he was deeply protective of the Ezegwe family, having watched Chibuzon grow up. He decided to dig deeper, quietly, without telling anyone yet. Over the following weeks, Tunde chatted more deliberately with other drivers, asking careful questions disguised as small talk. He learned Obina's name, learned he'd been seeing a woman on Bode Thomas for almost 2 years, planning to marry her by year end. Then, almost by accident, through a security guard at a government building, the building where Kelechi worked, he heard yet another mention of a civil servant engaged unofficially to a beautiful girl on the mainland, saving diligently for a ring. 3 different men, 3 different stories, 1 woman, 1 street. By the time Tunde had pieced together enough to feel confident, his hands were shaking as he sat outside the Ezegwe compound deciding what to do. This wasn't gossip anymore. This could genuinely hurt the young master he'd watched grow up. He made his decision on a Tuesday evening. He would tell Chibuzon everything. But fate had other plans, because that same week, completely unconnected, Obina decided it was time. 2 years of patient courtship, 2 years of saving, 2 years of believing he had found his humble, devoted wife, he decided to formalize things with a traditional introduction ceremony. He didn't really ask Neoma first. He simply showed up that Saturday, beaming, announcing he'd already spoken to his mother, already arranged a date, already informed relatives they would visit within 3 weeks. And Neoma's smile in that moment was the hardest she had ever had to hold, because an introduction meant her own family, blood relatives who knew nothing about Kelechi or Chibuzon, being pulled into a ceremony that assumed she was a simple, available, single woman ready for marriage. She agreed, because objecting would raise exactly the questions she could never answer. But that night, for the first time in 2 years, she laid out the full scope of her situation to Efeoma, admitting Chibuzon's existence for the first time. 3 men? Efeoma whispered, eyes wide. Neoma, one of them is Chief Ezegwe's son? Neoma said, I know what I'm doing, though her voice carried less certainty than it had in a long time. Do you though? Efeoma asked quietly, because it sounds like you've built something that's going to fall on all of us, not just you. That sentence sat heavy in the room, because even Neoma couldn't fully argue against it. If you are still here, subscribe right now before we continue, because what happens next is the kind of twist you do not want to miss, and it gets messier than anything we've covered so far. Tunde approached Chibuzon on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, driving him back from a meeting in Victoria Island. He chose his words carefully. Oga, I need to tell you something, and I beg you hear me well before you react. He laid it all out. The timber merchant, the civil servant, the same gate, the matching description. No drama, just facts. The silence that followed was the kind that makes the air feel thick and dangerous. Chibuzon said nothing for almost a full minute, jaw tightening, hands curling into fists. Are you sure about this? He finally asked, his calm far more frightening than shouting would have been. I'm sure enough that I felt I had to tell you, Oga. He said nothing else for the rest of the drive. When they arrived home, he sat in the car for several minutes, processing a rage that wasn't exploding immediately, but calculating, deciding exactly how and when to unleash it. Here's the twist you didn't see coming. Chibuzon didn't confront Neoma immediately. He wanted proof. Undeniable public proof. Some deep wounded part of his pride demanded that if he was going to destroy this, he'd destroy it completely, leaving her no room to talk her way out one more time. He had Tunde quietly confirm the date and venue of Obina's introduction ceremony. It wasn't hard. Once you know what you're looking for, Lagos gives up its secrets fairly easily. 3 weeks from that Saturday, at a small hall near Bode Thomas. Chibuzon's plan was simple and devastating. He would show up uninvited at the height of the ceremony, in front of everyone, and expose everything. But fate had one more twist waiting. In the weeks following his discovery, Chibuzon pulled back slightly,
fewer visits, shorter calls, a coldness Neoma noticed but attributed to business stress. She had no idea what was coming.
Meanwhile, Kelechi, blissfully unaware, finally completed saving for the ring. A modest gold band with a small diamond from a jeweler in Yaba. He decided he wanted to propose in front of Neoma's family to show how serious he was. He didn't know about Obina's ceremony. He didn't know the date. He simply independently decided to visit the following Saturday. The exact same Saturday, the exact same hall where Obina's introduction was scheduled. Pure, devastating coincidence. Neoma's family hall was the only such venue her relatives used for major occasions, and both men had been told at different times that this was where family things happened. Neoma, consumed with managing the introduction crisis, had let her guard down. When Kelechi mentioned the previous Wednesday that he wanted to visit properly that Saturday to talk to her family about something important, she distractedly told him, "That's actually a busy day. Can we do it the following week?" She thought she'd handled it. But Kelechi, in a moment of romantic impulsiveness he would both treasure and regret, decided to surprise her anyway. He had the ring. He'd rehearsed his words. He convinced himself busy just meant a few visiting relatives, nothing his presence couldn't accommodate. Now, picture the scene building because this is the climax. Saturday arrives. The small community hall has been decorated modestly, white and gold fabric, plastic chairs in neat rows, a table holding kola nuts and a calabash of palm wine. Obina's extended family sits proudly on one side, dressed in traditional attire. Neoma's family sits across, equally proud, genuinely believing their daughter has found a good man. Neoma sits beside her mother, doing her absolute best to project the humble, blushing bride-to-be, even as anxiety churns in her stomach. Ifeoma sits nearby, the only person fully understanding how fragile this performance really is. The ceremony begins smoothly. Kola nut is shared. Obina's elderly uncle, the family spokesperson, begins the formal speech requesting Neoma's hand, praising her humility, her devotion. Someone in the back is already filming for family memories. And then, the door opens. Kelechi walks in, clean shirt and trousers, ring box tucked in his jacket pocket, a hopeful smile as he scans the room. For one suspended second, nobody registers what is happening, but Neoma's face drains of color completely. Her mother notices first. Kelechi, oblivious to the ceremony underway, walks further in until his eyes land on Neoma. "Neoma," he says, voice carrying clearly across the now murmuring hall, "I know this weekend was busy, but I couldn't wait. I have something I need to ask you." The murmuring intensifies. Obina's uncle stops mid-sentence, frowning. Obina turns slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker as he registers the familiarity in this stranger's tone. "Who is this?" Obina asks, low and dangerous, directed at Neoman. Before she can answer, Kelechi drops onto one knee in the aisle between the two families, opens the ring box and says loud enough for the whole hall to hear, "Neoma Okafo, I've loved you for almost 2 years. I've saved every kobo I could to buy this ring. Will you marry me?" The hall goes completely, devastatingly silent. Then Obina stands up. "Somebody better explain to me what is going on here." Neoma opens her mouth, and for the first time in her entire deceptive career, nothing comes out. No smooth lie, no quick deflection, just silence, and the slow, horrified realization spreading across both families as the timeline fails to add up. Kelechi, still kneeling, ring box trembling in his hand, looks between Neoma's frozen face and Obina's furious one. "Wait," he says slowly, his voice cracking. "Who is this man? Neoma, what is happening?" And just when you think this scene cannot possibly get worse, the door opens again. Chibuzo walks in, not dressed for a party, dressed for war. Sharp black suit, expression carved from stone, Tunde trailing carefully behind him. He timed his arrival deliberately, waiting for maximum witnesses, maximum proof. He stops just inside the doorway, surveying the chaos, the ceremony, the stranger kneeling with a ring, Neoma frozen between two furious families, and even Chibuzo seems briefly stunned by how much worse this already is than he had planned for. "Two of you," he says slowly, eyes locked on Neoma. "I came here to expose two men. I didn't even know there was a third." The hall descends into pandemonium. Obina's family is on their feet, demanding explanations. Neoma's mother has both hands pressed to her mouth. Kelechi stares at Chibuzo with dawning, sickening understanding. Ifeoma, in the back, buries her face in her hands. And Neoma, who had spent 2 years building an empire of careful lies, who had genuinely believed she was smarter and more careful than anyone could account for, was completely exposed with nowhere left to run and no lie sophisticated enough to save her. 3 men, Obina repeats, barely above a whisper now, his fury cuddling into devastating heartbreak. 3 men, 2 years, and you had 3 men? "I can explain," Neoma starts, her voice thin, desperate. "Explain what?" Chibuzo cuts in, stepping further inside. "How you've been lying to all of us. How you let me believe you are faithful while collecting from his pocket and his pocket. How you let his family complete an introduction for you while another man proposed in the same room while I was planning to bring you to meet my father." The hall falls into a suffocating silence as the full scope settles over everyone. 3 separate serious relationships. 3 men who each genuinely believed they were building a future with this woman. Neoma's mother, finding her voice through shock, turned to her daughter. "Is this true? Neoma, is any of this true?" Faced with her own mother's devastated eyes, Neoma's composure finally completely shattered. Real tears, not the calculated kind she'd sometimes used before. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just started small, and then I couldn't stop, and—" "You couldn't stop?" Obina interrupted, hardening again. 2 years, Neoma. I was going to marry you. My mother already loved you before meeting you. I gave you money for rent, for furniture, for a business that probably doesn't even exist. Was any of it real?" Kelechi, still holding the closed ring box, spoke next, quieter but heavier. "I saved for 8 months. I skipped lunch most days. I told my mother you are the one." He swallowed hard. "Was I just convenient? Just an extra wallet?" Neoma can't look at him. She can't look at any of them. It's Chibuzo who delivers the final blow, his voice cold and final, carrying none of the explosive rage anyone expected, which makes it worse. "You should know my father has connections everywhere in this city. Whatever business you try to build off our backs, off our trust, consider it finished. Not just with me, everywhere." He walks out to leave, then pauses, looking back one last time. "I hope whatever soft life you are chasing was worth it, because you just lost everyone who was funding it in one afternoon." He walks out, Tunde following silently, leaving a stunned hall. What followed in the days after was, in many ways, even more painful than the confrontation itself, because the real consequences of deception rarely end with the dramatic reveal. They linger, they spread, they reshape lives long after the camera stopped rolling, so to speak. Obina left that day and never returned to Bode Thomas. He cancelled everything through a brief, business-like phone call, requesting that whatever he had given over 2 years be considered a loss, not because he didn't deserve it bad, but because he wanted nothing more to do with that chapter. He eventually married someone his mother had known for years, steady and straightforward. Those close to him noticed he had become more guarded, slower to trust. Kelechi's story was perhaps the quietest and most devastating. He didn't get angry. Not lastingly. He withdrew. He sold the ring back to the jeweler for a fraction of the price, using the small refund to help his mother with a medical bill. He finally told her the whole story, not for pity, but because he'd promised himself he'd never keep secrets the way Neoma had kept secrets from everyone. His mother held him while he cried and told him something he carried for the rest of his life. "Son, loving with your whole heart is not your shame, it's your strength. The shame belongs to the person who couldn't be honest with that love. Chibuzo, true to his cold warning, made sure word spread through every circle his family touched. The small side hustle Neoma had been quietly building, reselling imported clothes, the business she had told Obina was still in progress, collapsed almost overnight as contacts, fearful of crossing the Ezeigwe name, quietly cut ties. Not violent, just efficient, total. And in Neoma herself, within months, she had nothing. No Obina covering her rent, no Kelechi providing steady support, no Chibuzo's unpredictable generosity. The landlord, informed the payments would stop, gave her a brief grace period before requiring her to vacate. She moved back in with her parents, into the small room she hadn't occupied since secondary school. The soft life she'd worked so hard, so deceptively to build, completely gone, replaced by the much harder reality of starting over, carrying a reputation that had spread quietly enough of Lagos's interconnected circles that rebuilding trust would take years if it ever fully happened. If your mom moved out shortly after, choosing to stay with an aunt in Yaba while finishing her university preparations, it wasn't that she stopped loving her cousin. Family bonds rarely break that cleanly, but she'd watched closely enough, felt the weight of complicity closely enough to know that she needed her own foundation, one that didn't involve covering for someone else's web of lies. Months later, alone in that small childhood room, Inyoma stared at the ceiling, much the way she had stared at the fan in her old flat the night Chibuzo nearly discovered Kelechi's cigarettes. Except this time, there was no fear of being caught, because everything had already been caught, already exposed, already lost. What remained instead was something heavier, quieter, more permanent. The slow process of reckoning with exactly how she'd gotten here, and exactly what it had cost everyone, including herself. She thought about Obina's steady devotion, wasted on a carefully constructed version of a person who never really existed. She thought about Kelechi's gentle, earnest love, the way he'd looked at her like an answered prayer, and how she'd spent that love like currency instead of treasuring it like the rare thing it was. She thought about Chibuzo's cold final words, "I hope whatever soft life you were chasing was worth it." And for the first time, she let herself honestly answer that question. It hadn't been worth it. None of it had. The clothes, the money, the careful juggling of 3 men's hearts and wallets, all of it had given her temporary comfort, temporary admiration from a street that didn't know the real cost behind her glow. But it had also isolated her completely from anything real, anything stable, anything she could have built honestly, slowly, the way Obinad built his timber business, the way Kelechi built his quiet, steady life through patience and integrity. She'd built an elaborate structure entirely around deception, and when it finally collapsed, as these things always do, there was nothing genuine left standing to catch her. That's the lesson worth sitting with, and it doesn't just apply to romantic deception. It applies to every lie we tell ourselves we can manage forever, every shortcut we convince ourselves won't eventually demand its full price. Deception might feel in the moment like cleverness, like beating a system designed to catch people who aren't careful enough, but it's never actually free. It's borrowed time, borrowed trust, borrowed comfort, and eventually the bill arrives, usually all at once, usually in front of the very people whose respect you can least afford to lose. Neoma didn't just lose 3 men that Saturday afternoon. She lost her credibility, her stability, her family's trust, her cousin's companionship, and any chance of ever knowing what it might have felt like to build something real with any one of them, instead of something temporary with all 3. If there's one thing to carry away from this story, it's this. The soft life built on lies always eventually demands a hard reckoning. It might take months, it might take years, but the truth has a way of finding its threads quietly while you're busy congratulating yourself on how well you're managing everything. And when those threads finally pull tight, there's no explanation smooth enough to hold it all together anymore. So, if you've ever been tempted to build something on dishonesty, relationships, business, friendships, anything, let Inyoma's story be the warning you needed. Choose honesty, even when it's harder, because honesty is the only foundation that doesn't eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. That's it for today's story. If this gripped you, if you felt every twist, every devastating reveal, hit that subscribe button right now, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Stories about deception, about karma, about the hard, beautiful lessons life teaches us when we least expect them. Drop a comment telling me which of the 3 men you felt for the most, because I genuinely want to know. And until next time, take care of yourselves, stay honest, and never underestimate how small this city really is when it comes to keeping your secrets safe.